You ever get that feeling? Like you stumble on something huge, she right before it blows up.
Mm.
That's Bitcoin for me right now. It's like that feeling with email back in the early 90s, remember? Nobody knew what it would become, but you just knew it was big.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
This is like that, but amplified. And judging by this stack of Bitcoin stuff you sent over, the white paper, that explainer video, even a glossary, you're clearly ready to go way deeper than Bitcoin for beginners.
It seems like you've found the perfect mix of resources, too. You've got the technical side, the big picture arguments, even a peek into how the major players are thinking about Bitcoin.
Exactly. Okay, so before we get in the weeds of like the blockchain and all that, don't worry, we'll get there. Let's just level set.
Yeah.
In layman's terms, what is Bitcoin and why should anyone even care?
Simplest way I can put it is it's the first cryptocurrency. Imagine digital cash, but it totally bypasses banks for verification. No middlemen, no fees, just straight peer-to-peer transactions.
That's the part that always gets me. And Peter Van Valkenburg, in that explainer video you sent, he had this great analogy about email back in like 1972, promising tech, obviously, but nobody knew what it would become.
Right.
And he thinks Bitcoin is on a similar path, but instead of changing how we share information, it's revolutionizing the concept of money itself.
That's an interesting parallel. If the internet transformed communication, Bitcoin could totally change how we exchange value.
And we're already seeing it, right? El Salvador made it legal tender. Big-time investors are jumping in. Heck, my mom even asked me about Bitcoin at dinner last week.
It's definitely becoming more mainstream. But we have to remember, Bitcoin is still relatively new. Like with any new tech, you've got your diehards and then you've got the skeptics.
For sure. And that's what makes it so interesting, right? It's not just Bitcoin's the future or Bitcoin's a fad. There's actually a lot of nuance here.
Definitely.
Speaking of nuance, we were checking out that interview with Michael Saylor, the MicroStrategy CEO. Talk about a Bitcoin evangelist. This guy's all in.
Yeah, Saylor's very vocal about his support for Bitcoin. For him, it represents property and freedom. He even calls it perfect digital gold.
Whoa.
Yeah, he's basically saying Bitcoin's not just an investment, it's a way to protect your money, to safeguard it from inflation, government meddling, all those things that chip away at the value of traditional currency.
I can see why people are so drawn to that idea. But to really get how that's even possible, we got to dig into the tech behind it all.
Yeah.
Which brings us to blockchain. You've been digging into the white paper. Anything surprise you about how this actually works?
You know what surprises most people? For a technology this groundbreaking, blockchain is actually a pretty elegant concept at its core. Imagine a digital ledger, a record book. But instead of being controlled by, say, a bank, it's publicly viewable by anyone.
Okay, I'm with you so far. But how do you make a digital record truly tamper-proof? That's the part where I always get lost.
And that's where the chain in blockchain comes in. See, every time a Bitcoin transaction happens, it's like writing it down in this ledger. But here's the thing. Once a transaction is in, it's virtually impossible to change it, erase it, any detail, it's locked.
So it's like a permanent record. How's that even possible in the digital world?
That's the ingenuity of it. It's not just one big file. This ledger is copied across tons of computers all over the world. Think of it like a chain made of Lego blocks. Each block is a bundle of transactions, right? And they're linked to the one before it with something called a hash. It's like a unique digital fingerprint for that block.
Okay, so I'm picturing this Lego chain. What makes it so secure?
So now imagine someone tries to sneakily change even one tiny thing in a past transaction. Remember those unique hashes?
Yeah.
Even a tiny change completely changes the block's hash. Like dominoes, it sets off a chain reaction. And because each block is chained to the hash before it, one tiny change would invalidate every block after it. It'd be super obvious.
So it's like trying to swap a real Lego in the middle of a giant tower someone built. The whole thing would fall apart. You can't just sneak a fake one past everyone.
Precisely. And because this blockchain is spread across countless computers, you'd have to hack a majority of them at the exact same time to make your fake transaction stick. Basically impossible. That's the beauty of decentralization. No single point of failure, no central authority to corrupt.
So it's like a global game of digital Sudoku. If someone tries to cheat, the whole system's like, nope.
That's a great way to put it. And to enforce all of this, blockchain uses a proof-of-work system.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. My brain needs its own proof of work to process all this. Before we go any further, let me just make sure I'm with you. We've got Bitcoin, the digital currency, running on this revolutionary tech called blockchain. And blockchain is essentially a tamper-proof, decentralized ledger. Am I on the right track?
Absolutely. You've got the fundamentals down, and that's key because it underpins everything else we're going to talk about.
Okay, good. Because something tells me it's about to get even more interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got this incredibly secure system, right, for tracking digital transactions, tamper-proof and everything. But the big question is, what makes this more than just a tech experiment? Like, why should anyone besides, like, cryptography nerds actually care about Bitcoin?
That's where the real value proposition comes in. See, we have to shift our focus away from the tech itself and look at the real-world problems it could solve.
Okay, so what kind of problems are we talking about? Give me the big picture.
Well, think about all those centralized systems we rely on every single day for our finances.
Mhm.
Banks, payment processors, even governments. They all act as middlemen. And as Peter Van Valkenburg pointed out, centralized systems are just inherently vulnerable. Attacks, corruption, you name it.
Yeah, he had that point about the Equifax data breach, right? Millions of people's info just gone. And that's just one example.
Exactly. And those examples keep popping up. We've seen banks get hacked, payment systems go down, governments manipulating currencies. The list goes on and on. Centralized systems, they're just single points of failure waiting to happen.
And Bitcoin, being decentralized, takes that single point of failure and just obliterates it.
Exactly. With Bitcoin, there's no central target for hackers. No single entity can just decide to freeze your assets or manipulate their value. It's about putting you back in control of your own financial destiny.
Okay, I see the appeal there, especially these days. But Michael Saylor, in that interview, he kept saying Bitcoin is digital gold. Help me square that. How can ones and zeros compete with, like, actual gold?
It's an interesting comparison because it gets at what gives any asset value. See, people get caught up in the physical aspects of gold. It's shiny, you can make jewelry out of it, but the real value of gold comes from its scarcity and its history as a store of value for like centuries.
So you're saying the value is more of an idea than the actual metal itself.
Essentially, yeah. And Bitcoin shares a few key things with gold. Like gold, there's a limited supply of Bitcoin. Only 21 million will ever exist. It's literally coded into the system.
So no matter how high the demand gets, nobody can just print more Bitcoin like governments do with their currencies.
Exactly. That built-in scarcity makes it resistant to inflation, unlike your dollars or euros, which, let's be honest, can be printed like crazy. This is a core part of that digital gold argument, especially with inflation the way it is now.
So it's almost like a global digital gold rush, but instead of picks and shovels, we're using computers to mine for Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And like with real gold, the more people who believe in its value, the more that value increases.
It is a compelling analogy. And that shared belief, it's a powerful economic force. The big question is, though, can you actually walk into a store tomorrow and buy a cup of coffee with Bitcoin? Can you actually use it?
Right. Because it can't be secure and hold its value, but if I can't do anything with it, it's not super useful in my everyday life.
That's the million-dollar question, and there's a lot of debate, even within the Bitcoin community, about it. Some people say because the price is so volatile, it doesn't make sense for everyday purchases.
Because I buy a coffee with Bitcoin today, and tomorrow it drops 10%. That's a pricey latte.
Exactly. But then there's the other side that says, as more businesses and people start using Bitcoin, that volatility will naturally decrease, and that'll make it more viable for everyday transactions.
It's a chicken and egg thing, right?
Yeah,
People are hesitant because of the volatility, but more adoption could mean less volatility.
exactly. And we can't forget the potential for cross-border payments and stuff like that. Imagine sending money anywhere in the world instantly, with way lower fees than banks. That's huge for a lot of people.
That's a really compelling argument, especially as the world gets more interconnected. This is a lot to take in. We've gone from the nuts and bolts of blockchain to, like, the potential impact on the global financial system.
Yeah.
I feel like we've only scratched the surface. Where do we go from here? What's
Yeah.
next for Bitcoin?
Is it the future of money or just a stepping stone to something else entirely?
That is the question, isn't it? What we're seeing is a massive shift in the financial landscape. And like with any huge change, there are way more questions than answers. But that's what makes this so exciting, right? For sure. We're not going to pretend to have all the answers. But by really digging into Bitcoin, the tech, the pros and cons, all of it, we can at least start to understand what it could mean.
Yeah.
And that's incredibly valuable. It's amazing to me how we went from Bitcoin, this abstract concept, to understanding blockchain, to talking about its potential impact on everything from my bank account to, like, the global economy.
It is a lot to digest. But like with any complicated topic, grasping the fundamentals is the key. And you're well on your way.
Well, I definitely feel more prepared to talk about Bitcoin now,
Yeah.
but I have a feeling there's a lot more to uncover. It wouldn't be a deep dive if we didn't go even deeper, right?
Right. There are some key nuances we haven't even touched on yet, like the environmental impact of Bitcoin mining. That's a big one. And then you've got all the regulations around cryptocurrency that are constantly changing, the emergence of central bank digital currencies or CBDCs. Each of those could be a deep dive on their own.
Man, I knew it was too good to be true. It's like every answer just leads to more questions. But hey, that's what learning's all about, right? Wow, we have covered so much ground here, from how blockchain works to like how Bitcoin could change the world. It's obvious this is more than just some tech fad, right?
It really is. It's fundamentally changing how we think about value, trust, the very nature of money. It's huge.
And we tackled some big questions today, but what's really striking me is how many more this whole conversation has opened up. Every layer we peel back, it's like a dozen more pop up.
That's how you know a technology is truly disruptive. It's not just about the solutions it brings, it's about challenging how we see things, forcing us to rethink what's possible.
Like that whole debate we got into earlier.
Yeah.
Is Bitcoin more like digital gold, something to hold on to?
Yeah.
Or is it meant to be the currency of the future, something we actually use every day?
You know, the most interesting thing about that debate is that it doesn't have to be one or the other. Bitcoin could be both.
You know what? When you put it that way, it reminds me of the early internet. Back then, people were using it for email, doing research, maybe some early online shopping. But nobody could have predicted how big social media would get, streaming, the entire online world we live in now. Bitcoin could be on that same kind of unpredictable path.
Exactly. Trying to predict what Bitcoin will be is like trying to predict the internet back in 1995. What we can do is look at the things that'll shape its future.
And you mentioned a big one before, the whole environmental impact of Bitcoin mining. That's something that has to be addressed if it's ever going to be widely accepted, right?
Oh, it's a major hurdle, no doubt. The way Bitcoin mining works now, it takes a ton of energy. But more and more people are pushing for more sustainable mining, using renewable energy, more efficient tech. It's moving in the right direction.
So the problem isn't Bitcoin itself, it's how we're powering it.
In a nutshell, yeah. And this is where innovation within the Bitcoin world becomes so important.
What about governments? They haven't always been the best at, embracing new technology,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to something as important as money.
It's a crucial part of the conversation for sure. Some governments are embracing it, like El Salvador. Others are looking into central bank digital currencies, CBDCs for short. Basically, digital versions of their own currencies, but using blockchain technology.
So it's not necessarily a fight against Bitcoin. It's more like different forms of digital money are going to have to learn to coexist, maybe even compete as things evolve.
Exactly. And this is where really understanding the details is so important. It's not just about knowing what Bitcoin is, it's about understanding the things that will shape its future, how it could change our financial systems, our economies, even our entire societies.
It's like we're standing on the edge of a new era, and Bitcoin is just the first page of a much bigger story.
That's a powerful way to put it. And it's a story that hasn't been fully written yet, with new twists and turns, new possibilities popping up all the time.
Well, one thing's for sure, after today's deep dive, I'm even more convinced that this is a story worth paying attention to.
Me too. And the more we understand the basic principles, the technology, how all the pieces fit together, the better equipped we'll be to navigate this exciting, brand new world.
And I think that is the perfect note to wrap things up on. We started with the ABCs of Bitcoin and ended up on the edge of a financial revolution. That's the beauty of a deep dive, right?
Yeah.
It's about piquing your curiosity, getting you to ask the big questions, and leaving you with a sense of wonder about what the future holds.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And listeners, I have a feeling this is just the beginning of your own journey into the world of Bitcoin. Keep exploring, keep asking those questions.
Who knows? You might just uncover the next big thing in finance. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.